Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo in 1958 is one of the most beautiful films ever made, not just thematically, but with the cinematography. It's one of two or three really gorgeous Technicolor films, and one of the last of its kind. If there was ever a postcard from the movies and there was a stamp, I think I'd have to choose an image from Vertigo to go on there, because that's how lush the beautiful cinematography is in this film. And Hitchcock was known as a master of suspense, and this film contains one of the greatest plot twists and the greatest example of irony that's ever been told in film. But it's really one of the most personal and haunting films that Hitchcock did. I think it's a very personal film for him and his statement on women and power and obsession that we see throughout all of his films. But I think his personal life, I think he's one of the directors that really puts himself into his films. He's not like a Stanley Kubrick where you don't see any trace really of the man who he really is in his films, but Hitchcock was really a very personal and psychological director. But Vertigo is one of the best films ever made. I don't think it's better than Citizen Kane, but over the years I've looked at it and my appreciation for it has grown, and I adore this film now. It stars one of my favorite actors, the great James Stewart, who is one of the most masculine looking actors when you're just looking at him. He was very tall. He was about 6'3", 6'4" for his time period, so he's a very masculine man. He's got a very funny voice that doesn't quite fit with what he looks like, but he's one of the all-time greats, one of the most likable actors. But this is a very different role for him, as is his other films with Hitchcock. He plays a much darker and more tragic character. But at the beginning of the film, he plays a police officer who's had many years on the force, and the film opens with a very cliche cat and mouse chase across the rooftop, though, so it's a very energetic chase. And things go wrong, and the bad guy gets away, and worst of all, Scotty Ferguson is his name. He indirectly causes the death of an officer because he discovers that he has vertigo standing so high above the city. And what a lot of people have the misconception about with vertigo is it is not a fear of heights. And that comes from this film. It's one of the most iconic films of all time. Vertigo is not the fear of heights. It is an illusory sensation that geometry is moving around you. So when you are up high and you look around you and things seem to be moving and spinning, you get a little dizzy, you lose your balance, and you become disoriented. And that's what happens at the beginning of the film. So Scotty, he is very remorseful. He has a lot of guilt, and he abruptly retires from the police force. And this experience will come to haunt him over the rest of the film. And the genius in the storytelling is something that I believe is true in real life, that sometimes it takes when you have a tragedy in your life, it takes an even bigger tragedy to come along and dispel the old one. In other words, the only way to face your fears is sometimes you have to have a shock moment, and they even say that in the film, and that's foreshadowing. Anyway, sometime after his retirement, Scotty lives a boring life, closed in. He doesn't want to go outside. He gets a call from an old friend who wants to hire him as a private investigator. He reluctantly accepts the job offer because it's for an old friend. And it's a very mysterious case about the man's wife and she's disappearing during the day, and he doesn't know what to think of it. He's concerned for her health. He doesn't know what's going on. She has erratic behavior. Something mysterious is afoot. So Scotty, long story short, Scotty tails this woman for several days on several different occasions. And over the time, well, he has to save her. She tries to commit suicide. He saves her, takes her back to his place. He falls in love with her, and that's all part of the plan. It's all part of the scheme. But not to get to that. That's going to happen. That's sort of predictable in a movie like this. But the movie magic, what is so genius about this film, is that he was supposed to fall in love with her. That was part of the plan. It was not part of the plan for her to fall in love with him. So over the course of the film, there is an identity crisis. And basically, Scotty falls in love with this woman, and this clouds his judgment. And he is not able to put two and two together and to figure out what's really going on here. He's not able to save the woman that he loves, or at least the woman he thinks he loves. He's not able to save her, and he finds out what's wrong too late. And so the whole point of the story, it's very deep. The idealism of falling in love, the idealism that is often prevalent in the movies, ideal love, and trying to create a narrative for this other person, trying to mold them into the person that you want them to be and that you think they are, and they're not necessarily going to be that way. But more than that, the tragic character flaw of Scotty is his vertigo. And as vertigo comes into play, it is the most ironic moment in film history, and it hits you like a diamond bullet. The ending is so beautiful and so haunting and tragic. It's one of the greatest endings of all time. And immediately it clicks what the meaning of this film is and why it's called Vertigo. And that's one of the most iconic things ever in film, I think. Before you even watch this movie, it's just one of those images. The images, the beautiful imagery in this film lasts forever. And I knew that. I recognized these things years before I ever saw the movie itself. And so Chinatown is another great film that came along, and they go hand in hand. The two great mystery films ever made, at least the straightforward mystery films ever made in cinema. And I think it must be said that Chinatown would be unthinkable without Vertigo. Both films have cops that leave their profession because they have been part of a tragedy, they have guilt, they weren't able to save someone. And then they become private detectives, and then they fall in love with the woman on the job, and that clouds their judgment. And then at the end of the film, they lose the person that they love because they're unable to piece two and two together, and their virtues, they're very, it's a very ironic use of the term, but they're not very virtuous, but their failings in the past come back to haunt them. They keep making the same mistakes. And really the deep message of the film is about people in the real world that keep making the same mistakes, and they keep going back in the past, and they don't know how to change. And they're going after that idealism. And that's why Vertigo, whether you look at it as a straightforward mystery story, a crime thriller, or something more, it's one of the most romantic films ever made, and it's really what going to the movies is all about.